I grew up about a mile and a half from here in the 1950s, just as Long Island was starting to explode with Levittown-style development. Levittown has since become code for the dense suburban sprawl that we've seen across our country. Between 1950 and the year 2000, Nassau and Suffolk County's population increased by more than 300%. Before then, this area right here was part of the 60,000-acre prairie grassland known as the Hempstead Plains, stretching from one end of Nassau County to the other. Farmland abounded, and our bays and harbors were filled with clamming boats and fishermen. Today, we can feel the impact of Nassau and Suffolk County's 2.8 million people. For example, each of those 2.8 million people generates about 2.5 pounds of human waste every day. And what we once thought was an adequate, acceptable way of treating that waste turns out to have been a huge miscalculation. We discovered this mistake in a rather surprising way. Not long ago, Long Island was among the nation's top shellfish producers. We were responsible for some 50% of all the clams eaten on the East Coast, and we were home to the famous and once plentiful Blue Point's oyster. But after decades of intense coastal development and unsustainable fishing practices, shellfish took a dramatic decline in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, all but disappearing from our local waters. The Nature Conservancy, in an effort to address this decline, we undertook a grand experiment. We attempted to kickstart Mother Nature by restocking millions of clams, scallops, and oysters back into our water. But no matter how much restocking we did, the shellfish simply did not survive and reproduce. Why? Because our water had become too polluted. Now, my story doesn't end with a failed experiment. Instead, we switched gears. We focused on the problem, on the pollution, specifically nitrogen pollution, excessive nitrogen pollution from wastewater, the predominant source of which was antiquated, outdated septic systems and cesspools, some 400,000 of them across Long Island. Imagine for just a minute Long Island as a sandbox with a layer of fresh water directly underneath, surrounded by seawater on all sides. What we, Long Islanders, put into our sandy, porous soils trickles down first into our freshwater lens and then gradually seeps out into our bays and our oceans. So what do we put into our sandbox? Chemicals, fertilizers for lawns, and wastewater. And septic systems were never designed to remove nitrogen from wastewater. So you might ask, nitrogen, what's the problem with nitrogen? It makes plants grow. It does. But too much of a good thing becomes a problem. And as nitrogen from wastewater gradually seeps into our freshwater lens and then out into our bays and harbors, it triggers massive blooms of algae. We essentially have over-fertilized our local waters. These massive blooms cause shellfish to die and fish kills. And it's not just marine life that suffers. Our drinking water supply is threatened. Local economies of shell fishing, tourism, recreation suffer. People who just want to go to the beach to enjoy a day of swimming, of clamming, or fishing can't because of these blooms. Pets have died from drinking nitrogen-laden pond water, and people have fallen ill from swimming. This was the state of harmful algal blooms surrounding Long Island just this past summer in 2017. It's a colorful picture, but it's not a pretty one. Much of Long Island's 1,100 miles of shoreline and waters were impacted by some sort of algal bloom. And what's worse is that the steady rising in temperatures of our waters, as a consequence of climate change, are increasing the frequency and the toxicity of these blooms. If we are to thrive in the year 2050, we need to win the battle to restore swimmable, drinkable, fishable water, the things that matter most to Long Islanders. There's good news. We are already well on our way to enhancing public awareness about this problem, promoting the right kind of technology, and securing the public funds needed to transform antiquated technology, replace it with state-of-the-art nitrogen-moving systems that will return the water we use back to nature in a clean condition. And Long Island is not alone in this pollution problem. Massive algal blooms are occurring all over the world, such as this one on a beach in China. Pollution kills 9 million people every year. That's 15 times the number killed by war and other forms of violence. So what's at stake in the year 2050 when our planet's population is expected to grow to 10 million people? 10 billion people. Those 10 billion people will require about 60% more in food calories than what's currently available. And yes, they'll be producing a lot more human waste. Of those 10 billion people, about 70% are expected to live in cities. And 2/3 of those cities will be right on the coast, subjecting billions of people to deadly storms and sea level rise. Just last year alone, 68,000 people every day were displaced by flooding. Seems like just a frightening preview of what's to come. Each of the last 4 years, 2017 included, has earned the badge of being the hottest year on record. I'd say we're in a pretty hot mess. We need to think of tackling pollution, climate change, and the massive disruptions it causes as disease prevention, as healthcare. And let's not forget that climate change is not only a disruptor, it's a divider. Those less privileged are actually much more prone to its deadly effects. Nature needs to be recognized and valued as the most valuable player it is. But as a society, we don't do this terribly well. We can do better. For example, the value that marshes and wetlands and dunes play in storm prevention and flooding prevention is usually ignored. The marshes, the dunes, they're leveled, they're filled in, they're built over, and then storms occur and massive flood damaging happens. But here on Long Island, after Superstorm Sandy, it was reported that where present and healthy, wetlands actually helped prevent an additional $625 million in flood damages from occurring. Communities began to wake up and appreciate the value of these natural assets once they were measured in dollars and cents. So what is our relationship with nature? Is it just take until there's nothing left? Have you ever been in a relationship that felt like a one-way street? You give, and they take. Or maybe it was the other way around. Either way, it's depleting. On the flip side, when there's equal parts give and take, the relationship hums, it thrives, it grows. Nature doesn't behave like a credit card. You can't spend down all your credit, open up a new line, blow that one out, and so on. Once we've depleted our environment, it's really hard. It's very expensive, and sometimes not even possible to get it back. Here on Long Island, we need to take responsibility for returning the water we use back to nature in a clean state before it's too late. There are signs of hope we can succeed. Places like Boston Harbor, Tampa Bay in Florida, even parts of Long Island Sound have recovered from serious degradation when polluting practices are halted and clean water is restored. And there are other examples of this vision of people and nature thriving together. Fishermen who will catch a few less fish today by agreeing to accept sustainable harvesting restrictions, but they'll help protect their livelihoods into the future. And they'll help ensure the recovery of key fish populations and the whales that eat them, like this beauty, recently spotted feasting off the coast of Long Island's waters. Will we succeed in creating a world where people and nature thrive in 2050? I don't have a crystal ball. We can continue on a path of depletion, or we can change the way we think and the way we act, and make decisions that get us better connected to what we value most in nature. Businesses, communities, governments, individual people make decisions all the time that collectively add up to putting us on one of these two paths. So your decisions matter. Where does the food you eat come from? And where does all the packaging from it go? What chemicals do you use every day in products that you use that are washed down your drain? Can you take public transportation more often and decrease your own carbon footprint? And as a voter, are you familiar with positions that candidates for office have on really important issues like sustainable agriculture and renewable energy? Pay attention. Folks all around us are taking steps to get back on a path that connects us with what we value most in nature. Make informed decisions. And most importantly, ask yourself, what do I want my relationship with nature to be? Thank you.